Authorities aren't convinced the Channel Islands should fall into line with the rest of Europe over equal rights. Not bound by EC rules, they're proud to have kept red tape to a minimum. That, they say, is what's attracted employers, to the benefit of both sexes. Many women have jobs with the finance houses and banks that represent the cornerstone of the island's economies. Politicians like Tom Jordan, who runs his own hotel in Jersey, say women should appreciate the advantages they have.
We are a very caring island. If you're a single parent in Jersey, our government lets you earn £15,000 with one child tax-free. Does yours? Our government, if you're married with 2 children, you can earn up to £20,000 tax-free. Does yours? Our government gives people cheap housing loans to buy artificially low-priced houses to start them off. Does yours? Now that's the kind of society we've got over here. We may not be up to OFA with the employment law in Great Britain, but quite frankly, there hasn't been a need.
Incentives like these have tempted large numbers of wealthy newcomers to the island, and affluence engendering a kind of comfortable complacency may have persuaded island women it wasn't the time to take up the equal rights banner. Equal pay! Equal pay! It was economic necessity that drove UK women onto the streets in the 1960s and 70s. Their mass demonstrations helped force the creation of laws supporting equal pay and equal rights. As a result, the Equal Opportunities Commission was born, set up to ensure the legislation was enforced.
All of the things that have led to pressure on the mainland for women to share equally in the labour market on an equal basis with men have just been missing on the Channel Islands. And of course, I think socially they're a very different setup. The small islands are very proud of their independence, and part of that independence is being rather old-fashioned as far as women's rights are concerned.
But some women are now trying to bring the Channel Islands up to date, and pressure to alter traditional attitudes is steadily growing.
It's easy in Jersey to say, well, it's a nice place to live and we're all happy here, and so what, I lost my job because I'm pregnant, but it's awfully nice on the beach with the baby. And so it doesn't really matter, but it does matter. I could go out into the street and pick up women at random who sit beside young men in the same office and are paid less. We have to say, it might not matter to you, but it matters to other women who don't have that choice, women who have to work to earn money for their children. We have so many single parents on the island. And if women of the island don't get up and fight, then we're all done for.
As well as urging women to make a stand, campaigners are trying to persuade employers to change their outlook. Farmers in Jersey have traditionally paid women lower wages than men. Higher salaries in the financial sector have made farm work less attractive to the locals, and every year hundreds of Portuguese are brought in from Madeira on temporary contracts. Potato planting on steep hillside farms can be backbreaking. Even so, the women here doing the same job are being paid less than the men.
We would like to feel that the woman's wage will come much closer to a man's wage, but to say that it would be exactly equal with a man's wage, it would be a little unfair.
So you wouldn't like to see laws, for example, that dictated that a woman ought to have the same pay as a man?
No, I don't think the industry would want to see that whatsoever. Certainly in the winter, when we get some rainy days where it's very difficult to find jobs outside, it's always the men that have to go out and do either logging or felling trees, whereas the ladies are kept in to do more menial jobs. In those instances, certainly the men are doing the tougher task.
Heavy work is rewarded with higher pay, even though the women may put in the same number of hours. It's a similar story in the flower industry in Guernsey. Traditionally it was regarded as men's work, but now half the workforce is women. The growers say they're more dexterous and skillful at picking than men are.
We've got to have speed in this industry. If we haven't got speed, it just won't pay. It's a very fiddly job. Some men can do it, but usually the woman's a lot quicker.
But would you say that that work was among the lowest paid in the industry?
Yes, I'd say it probably was.
Despite their talent for the work, union leaders believe women are employed because the wages are too low to attract men.
I think it's because of cheap labour. The employers in the horticulture and tourism trade are now saying men can't do the jobs, only females. And you find that it really means that they can get away with less pay.
Guernsey's government has rejected equal pay legislation. They say too many laws deter employers.
The island has to be very careful in the way that it creates legislation, in the problems that, I won't say unnecessary legislation, but over-legislation cause. And we are a small place. We do have a lot of small companies, and we have to safeguard those small companies because they are the backbone of our industry.
So you would say then you'd have to safeguard the industries, and yet that same protection couldn't be accorded to the women?
I think that the protection accorded to women or to anybody in the workforce is to ensure that we have a good base for them to get work at any time when they need it.
While women do want and need jobs, they still feel entitled to a fairer deal in the workplace. And while professionals can often negotiate equal pay and maternity rights, manual workers find it more difficult.
Often we do the same job as a man, and yet because they're a man and they're expected to have wives to keep and children, they get more money because of that, like, you know. But some of us, like, I'm a widow, I've got a house to keep, family, and I have to do one quite a lot less than the men have, and I've got the same bills as they have. So I think it's sort of, it should be, if you do the same job as a man, you get paid the same.
In the hospital laundry, the women believe they are treated fairly. It's not always the case. But in a small island community, those who speak out can be labelled troublemakers, and there's a reluctance to protest when there is a problem.
Probably the authorities involved will say, well, we haven't had any complaints from women. And I think that is simply because women think, what is the point? Nothing will get changed. I have tried to encourage in the past, you know, women's groups to get together to form themselves so that they can put pressure, because it is pressure that actually changes attitudes.
It was pressure groups that successfully hammered home the message from women in mainland Britain. Victory came in 1975. The Sex Discrimination Act banned prejudice in employment, education and advertising.
To keep within the law, employers must make it clear that jobs are open to both men and women. It will be illegal to use pictures of women, or men for that matter, and employers will have to be careful about how they word advertisements. Fully experienced man will be banned, along with Girl Friday.
But in Jersey and Guernsey, where there's no such legislation, employers can still advertise for staff of one sex or the other. They can even specify what they want the successful applicant to look like. It doesn't help a woman to break into a man's world.
Initially, from answering adverts in the paper and things like that, they often asked me if I was phoning on behalf of my husband or my boyfriend, and when I answered no, that the job was for myself, they used to say, well, we don't actually employ women, or that we don't have facilities for women. They used to come up with quite a few excuses, or what I thought were excuses.
Mireille Bonds has a licence to drive heavy goods vehicles. A rally driver in her spare time, she applied for dozens of jobs as a lorry driver in the building trade in Jersey, but was never taken seriously.
And they just tend to pat you on the head and tell you to run along, little girl. It would cause too much upset in the company. One even turned around and said he would have a dispute on his hands if he employed me. There was only one company who actually took my name and address and said that if he had a position, that he would come back to me and maybe consider me for an interview. So that gave me a bit of confidence, but that was one person out of all the companies in Jersey, which I thought was a bit disgusting, really, considering I'm local and I was willing to try and even take a week without any wages to prove to them that I was capable of driving the vehicle.
Mireille's persistence has paid off, and she's finally secured a full-time job as a driver. But even in service industries like tourism, where women are welcomed, there's no fast track to the top jobs. Many women have found their gender a barrier to career progression.
And what date would that be? Yes, that should be fine.
Muriel Ellison is a conference organiser in a top Jersey hotel. Despite her experience gained in the UK, finding a job here was hard. She believes that because she's married, employers thought she might soon leave to have children.
It was very noticeable to me
When I first came over here, how many people asked me if I was married, which wasn't something that I put on my CV. I never had done because it wasn't relevant. And when I said that I was married, very often the next question was, when are you going to have children, or what are your thoughts on having children, or what does your husband think about you working, which I found was very extraordinary, really.
The traditional woman's role as purely homemaker and mother is changing in most Western countries, though in the Channel Islands, acknowledgement of the fact by the authorities seems to be taking longer. But increasingly women here want to have children, then continue with their careers. Indeed, many of them have to. This children's centre in St Helier is open between 7:30 in the morning and 6 in the evening. It's a boon for working mothers, many of them forced back into full-time jobs by the recession and rising property prices. It was set up by Chris Wakeham as a nursery for under fives and a pre- and after-school centre for older children.
There is a lobby that doesn't really believe women should do anything but sit at home and look after their children, which is very nice if you've got enough funds to do it. I would say a good half of my mothers would rather be home with their children until their children are older. And this just isn't possible. And we are living in a different world. We've got to accept the world as it is. And unless you've got two incomes, you're just not going to be able to survive.
Though many women are choosing to return to work after childbirth, employers in Jersey and Guernsey aren't obliged to keep their jobs open for them or provide maternity pay. In fact, women can even be dismissed for becoming pregnant. Françoise is lucky. Her employer's holding her job open, though doesn't pay her. She claims £81 a week maternity benefit from the state. She has support from her boyfriend, but can't imagine how single mothers cope.
I don't know how they manage, to be honest. I think it depends on their situation, if they're at home or if they're living in accommodation, private accommodation. A lot of them end up in hostels for single mothers. And I think that's the only way they can manage. I certainly couldn't manage in private accommodation. On that, so I wouldn't even be able to pay the rent, let alone keep myself or the baby. There'd be no bills paid.
Corrie Stein is a senator in the Jersey States. 2 years ago, she set up a committee to examine just how widespread sex discrimination was in the island. Last December, the committee tried to introduce a code of maternity rights for would-be working mothers. The code gave women the right to return to their job after childbirth and asked employers to pay them 90% of their salary for at least 6 weeks of their maternity leave. But although the code was voluntary, the states rejected it.
I find it very difficult to understand. Every other country in the world has these by legislation. Every civilized country has this kind of legislation, and we haven't. I had wanted to do in a different way, in a kinder way, in a code which people could slowly but surely implement, and therefore I was very surprised with the result.
Opponents said the code would be an economic disaster for small firms who, unlike UK employers, wouldn't be able to reclaim maternity pay from the government. A businessman who's also a senator owns this St Helier Jewellers. He supports the maternity code but feels small companies, that's 60% of Jersey employers, should be exempt.
The strain on small business particularly in losing an important employee would be very hard to bear. Then of course the other problem was the employer was bound to keep the job open for the employee, whereas the mother, quite possibly having had the baby, would decide that she didn't want to come back to work.
Other politicians argue statutory maternity rights would provoke discrimination by employers against young women.
If the voluntary code would have, let's say, in a year's time become law, these employers would not have employed young people because they would have said it's too expensive. They will employ 40-year-old women, or they would have employed men. Now, I ask you this, what is more logical, to protect somebody's job or just to follow blindly a code which, although laudable on its own, doesn't make sense? Not in Jersey.
I think that's an argument. It's an economic argument that can be put. But I think the opposing argument will be how long must island women be regarded as second-class citizens, and how long will they accept that? Because with communications increasing all the time, they're bound to see that their position is very different from that of women in other places. And I think the two pressures will eventually meet in such a way that women will have equal rights, because it's very unlikely that they're going to continue to be happy with a situation that's becoming further and further away from the mainland.
Any reason why you were thinking about termination, that you didn't want to sort of go ahead and keep the baby? Is it that you feel you're too young, or you've got your career in front of you, or...?
I think I'm a bit too young, and I've got a lot of other responsibilities at the moment. I don't think I could carry on and go through with the pregnancy.
Every year, more than 300 women from Jersey travel to the mainland to have an abortion. It's illegal to perform the operation in the Channel Islands, and in Jersey it's a criminal offence, unless the health of the mother is at risk. Marion Walton travelled to England for a termination at a private clinic when she was 19. Afraid to confide in her parents, she kept the traumatic experience to herself.
It was like a factory line, production line. There was very little respect, and your respect's at a low anyway, because you're sneaking off, you've lied, you're a criminal. Jersey ships its problem to the mainland, and because it's such a traumatic thing, you normally want to forget it, and you're not going to come out and make a noise about it. But ideally it should be accepted that it exists, and post-abortion syndrome recognised, and pre and post counselling provided. I mean, it's going to happen. It's always happened.
Marion is now at university in Stoke, but after her abortion she dropped out of an earlier college course, suffering from severe depression as a result of what she'd been through. Back home she wanted to help others who'd had similar experiences, but when she put up a poster urging women to contact her, the police became involved.
The police called me in because I put it up on private property. I put it on a telephone box. And then called me in, had me in a cell, read me my rights, and told me that there might be more far-reaching implications because of the, the subject, abortion. Because by Jersey law, the only statute that exists is about 200 years old, and actually says that aiding and abetting abortion can carry a penalty of life imprisonment or death.
The medical profession in Jersey also wants the antiquated law updated, or at least clarified, and would welcome a public debate on the matter. Although it's a controversial issue, many doctors insist women can approach them for confidential advice about abortion, but some are worried about their legal position.
Even if it doesn't go all the way down the line of making it available on demand, at least we would be clear what the regulations are with regards to abortion in Jersey, because I think at the moment, with it being common law, there are certain reservations in the minds of the medical profession as what actually is the legality of abortion here. Certain instances are quite clear, but there are others that are grey, and people really like to be a bit more certain about that, particularly if they may be charged with criminal offences.
Hello, can I help you?
At a refuge for battered women in St Helier, steel shutters, a panic button and security cameras all ensure unwanted visitors are kept on the outside. The hostel opened 4 years ago after a group of women mounted a campaign to prove the need for such a refuge in Jersey. Sarah left her husband after being subjected to verbal and physical abuse for many years. The worst attack lasted for 4 hours.
I had 2 massive black eyes. All my lips were split. I couldn't open my eyes for 3 weeks. I couldn't eat for a long time. I had my hair ripped out of my head. I was thrown down the stairs. The sole of his shoe left bruises on my feet, where he jumped on my feet, and he's a very heavy man. I had massive bruises down my legs where he kicked me, and my arms, my stomach. I don't think there was much left, really.
Since it opened, the hostel has provided shelter and support for 800 women and their families. Coming here is often the first step in a long and difficult legal journey. Under Jersey law, fathers have responsibility for their children, and even if a woman is being abused by her partner, he still has automatic custody of their offspring.
There was one occasion where a child was taken
from just outside the refuge, and there was nothing that could be done about it. Nothing. And that was heartbreaking for the woman. Now this can be changed, but the woman actually has to go to court to ask for custody of her children. So that period when she first leaves is a period of great risk for her, because her husband can come along and quite legally remove the children. This is really something which needs altering, it needs changing. The law should be changed to help women in this situation.
If I was walking through town tomorrow, if he felt like it, he could just take the kids. There's nothing I can do. That's another reason why you stay home. Because he used to say things like, I'll take 2 of them and you have 2. Well, I mean, I'm not splitting my kids up, so you stay home.
In Guernsey, parents have joint responsibility for their children, a policy the refuge wants Jersey to adopt, so women don't stay with violent partners through fear of losing their children. While some women in Jersey and Guernsey are gradually trying to improve their lot, on one of the smaller Channel Islands there's been little pressure for change. Sark, with just over 500 inhabitants, has largely resisted the trappings of 20th century life. Cars are banned and a feudal system still operates. Land, leased from the seigneur, is passed on through the male line.
Our whole system here tends to prefer, as a system, the male. Our whole inheritance system, which is old feudal land tenure, favours the male. And I can't see that changing. It is a male-dominated society, there's no doubt about that, really. It's only very recently that married women had any rights at all. Everything, up until, 17 years ago, everything belonged to the husband. Everything. Your jewels, you couldn't even have your own bank account as a married woman.
Women like Muriel Armogy are now entitled to hold seats in Sark's parliament, the Chief Pleas, which she says represents a measure of progress.
Days gone by, I think it was a bit more of a male stronghold. I think these days it's the ladies are getting a look in now. The old families that are still on the island, I think the ladies' place is in the home. I think the men, till the land and make the rules.
Sark is proud of its ancient rules and customs. The greffier or clerk of the island is John Hammond. Among his records are details of an old law which permits wife-beating. Distasteful to some, to others it's just part of Sark's quaint history.
Well, this first section here states that the husband could smack his wife's face without drawing blood. It was charged 5 sous. If he drew blood, it was 10 sous. Squeezing the nose, that was also 5. If he caught hold of his wife by the throat with one hand, 5 sous, with 2 hands, 10 sous. And those were the conditions in those days.
The law has never been repealed, but the greffier insists any man who beats his wife these days would face a much more stringent penalty. Like Jersey and Guernsey, Sark has no equal pay legislation. Many of the islanders are self-employed anyway, and both women and men have to do a variety of jobs to make a living. Older residents are content with their lot and wouldn't welcome any change to the status quo.
We like to stay with our old ideas. We don't like changes like that. Keep the old rules.
So you don't want to see laws that say women should have equal rights and equal pay?
Oh, no. No, it's not right.
Why isn't it right?
Because we've been brought up the old way and we want to stick to the old rules. Yeah, far better than English rules.
Women who have campaigned for change over the years, like the suffragettes who arrived in Jersey in 1913, are often treated with hostility, ridicule and contempt. Unflattering cartoons were published in the island in the wake of the suffragettes' visit, and even today, so-called feminists can suffer animosity. Imogen Nichols says some members of the community shun her because of her views.
I have women who cross the street when they see me coming. I have husbands of women who don't allow their wives to associate with. That sort of thing. I feel that women here are held back, and often they're held back by themselves. You often find young women who leave the island, go away to university, and they realise they're living in a far more advanced society when they move to the UK or to Europe. And they come back here and they realise they do not want to stay here. We're losing a lot of our young people because of the system under which we live. I mean, the socially sanctioned oppression, under which we live as women here is just accepted, because most women who leave the island don't come back.
Campaigners say the exodus of articulate and educated women will continue unless employers improve their conditions. But most politicians want more concrete evidence of support for change, and a flagging economy increases resistance to laws that would cost employers money.
Maybe recession isn't the right time to be considering this, and we are suffering from a recession in the island as much as anybody else. In the future, maybe. We've looked at it in 1986, along that time. Maybe it's time to look at it again, perhaps in 2 or 3 years' time. We look at things like this when we need to and when pressure is brought to bear.
It seems to be catch-22 in times of boom when we don't have enough people to fill the jobs. Women are probably generally looked after, as all employees are. In times of recession, men are afraid of losing their jobs and won't speak up. When is the right time for them to speak up? I know that there are problems out there, and I think a lot of statesmen, if they put their hand on their heart, would say that it isn't fair. But until we start to see public pressure coming from the direction of women, I see very little mood for change.
Unless women themselves pursue their rights more vocally, the tide of opinion seems unlikely to turn. And while activists believe the time is right for a new campaign, the authorities aren't prepared to act unless there's substantial public pressure. It seems it's now up to the ladies in waiting to influence their future, or be content with the values of the past.